Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. This is Laura DiMaria, the Executive Director of NASED. Thank you so much for joining us on this Tuesday for this special webinar presented by NASED Associate Member ViewPoint Cloud. Tiny homes as a crisis response to homelessness will be introduced here shortly by Rachel Kaiser, the Director of Strategic Growth at ViewPoint Cloud, and then presented by Sharon Lee, the Executive Director of the Low Income Housing Institute. So today's discussion is a history and a how-to guide sharing how the Low Income Housing Institute in Seattle developed its innovative tiny house program to quickly and affordably provide shelter to people living on the streets, and how other communities can do the same. LIHI went from 1 village to 10 in 3 years, learning valuable lessons in construction, management, and key partnership formation along the way. So before I turn it over to Rachel, and before we get started, there's a couple things to note. So one is that all attendees are on mute and in listen-only mode, and we'll also be recording today's session in case one of your colleagues misses it or you want to revisit it later. And so since everyone is in mute, questions can be asked using the question box feature in your control panel. And let's go ahead and practice to make sure everyone knows how to use it. So you can ask a question at any time throughout this webinar. And in order to practice, what I want you to do, listeners, is to type in where you're from and whether you're a ViewPoint Cloud customer. So using that little box off to the side that says questions, just where you're from, where you're calling in from, and whether you're a ViewPoint Cloud customer. All right, we've got Chester County, Pennsylvania, Tarrant County, Texas. I see we have some future ViewPoint Cloud customers. Great, okay. All right, so everyone knows how to use the question box. Lovely. All right. Well, at this time, I'm now going to turn it over to Rachel Kaiser, who is the Director of Strategic Growth at ViewPoint Cloud. Take it away, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Laura. She mentioned my name is Rachel, and I'm with ViewPoint Cloud, where we make what we like to term the TurboTax or Amazon of online permitting, the industry's most user-friendly software platform for permitting, licensing, and inspections operations for local, state, and county governments all across the country. We're often working with community development and housing officials, and one topic that has been of interest to many of our customers and people in our community is how tiny houses might be a constructive part of an affordable housing strategy. So that's why I'm really excited today to be introducing our featured speaker, Sharon Lee, and the LIHI Institute. Sharon Lee is the founding executive director of the Low Income Housing Institute, or LIHI, a nonprofit organization based in Seattle and founded in 1991. There, they develop and operate housing for low income and homeless people and provide supportive service programs to assist tenants in maintaining stable housing and increasing their own self-sufficiency. LIHI staff has developed over 4,000 units of rental and home ownership housing in Washington State, and they own over 2,000 units serving individuals, families, seniors, homeless people, and those with special needs. Sharon Lee is an advocate on issues of housing justice, housing preservation, and homelessness. She also holds a Master's of Architecture and a Master of City Planning from MIT and a BA with honors from the University of Pennsylvania. She was awarded an honorary doctorate of humane letters from Wilkes University for her work on ending homelessness, and LIHI has won national and local awards for design and excellence and environmental sustainability. So we are all super excited and lucky to have Sharon here with us today. And without further ado, I will pass it off to you, Sharon, so we can go ahead and get started with the presentation.
Thank you very much. Yes, I hope everybody can see. I'm going to start the PowerPoint. So
Yes,
we are very happy to be. Okay, we are very happy to be able to announce that 3 weeks ago we opened up our 10th tiny house village. 9 of them are supported by the City of Seattle through the Human Services Department. And one of them is supported by a church partner. So I'm going to quickly move through the PowerPoint, and then I'm happy to answer all types of questions around this. I know it's very unusual to have actually we have a very positive, incredible partnership with the City of Seattle and also some of our other government agencies around tiny houses. So these are the areas where we address homelessness, housing, transitional, permanent supportive housing. We also have urban rest stops, which are hygiene centers for homeless people. An urban rest stop has showers, laundry, restrooms, and services for unsheltered as well as sheltered homeless people. And it focuses on homeless people who are working, who need to be presentable and stay clean so that they can secure employment or keep a job, and then tiny house villages. So we also do a lot of advocacy in terms of local and state legislation, county legislation, and we also operate volunteer programs. So this is the core part of our businesses as a housing nonprofit. We have low-income, affordable housing for special population groups as well as the workforce, low-wage workers. So you can see on the left, we opened up 49 units. That includes 2 floors for the workforce, people making minimum wage. The second floor of this building includes housing for homeless young adults. And then the first floor includes a food pantry or a food bank. And then there's also a barista training program cafe. So the young adults are being trained, and we have a partnership with Youth Care. So this is mixed-use building right by University of Washington. And then on the right is we just opened this building, which is 70 units of workforce housing with a preschool early learning for 80 children 3 to 5 years old. So while we're building, it takes 3 to 4 years to build these apartment buildings. We realize that there's close to 12,000 homeless people on the streets or in shelters in Seattle, King County. Here's a picture of the urban rest stop. We're serving homeless men, women, and children, which are hygiene centers. Here are some examples of tiny house villages. And you can see that there's a lot of design differences. So the reason why we're doing tiny houses primarily is because the unsheltered homeless is such a large population, and it takes too long to be developing permanent supportive housing. So we're trying to do both. We're not picking one or the other. We're actually trying to do both. Historically, in Seattle and probably in many of your other communities, people have been camping in tents legally, typically illegally. I don't know if there are that many legal tent villages or encampments, but one of our partners is Nicholsville, which is a grassroots organization comprised of homeless people. But they have in the past squatted on public property, private property, and every once in a while they get swept or told that they have to leave or get arrested. So we initially offered Nicholsville, when the city threatened to evict them, we offered them a site on one of our pieces of land that we were going to build multifamily housing. And so we developed a long-term relationship with them. And we actually had a tent village, a legal tent village on one of our sites. And it worked so well that the tent community developed into, we started adding tiny houses because they were such superior places for people to live other than tents. So this is why we feel tiny houses are needed. There's a severe lack of shelters, lack of affordable housing. In Seattle, we have the 3rd largest homeless population of any urban city. So we're behind LA and New York, and then it's Seattle, and then I think followed by, Honolulu, San Francisco, and other cities. So last year, 169 men and women died living on streets. And we are trying to find solutions where people who are homeless and can't get into low-income housing or can't even get into shelter, they have a place to stay that's humane. Here's the point in time count, and you can see that in King County, you will see under the 12,112 number on the left-hand side, we have 52% of the homeless population in King County are unsheltered. People living in vehicles, buildings, in tents, and then only 57,092 are sheltered. So we definitely need to have some type of quick response. What can we put up quickly that would shelter people? And this is a slide that we feel is very important because a lot of families, a lot of people cannot get into traditional shelters. We have a lot of situations where the whole family cannot stay in a shelter. Large families, LGBTQ individuals, straight and gay couples with children. And we have a lot of men with children, single men with children, or families with a teenage son are not often allowed in a shelter. We have immigrant refugee households, undocumented households, people with pets. Lots of people with pets cannot access a shelter. So that is why we feel tiny houses are a good solution, interim, short-term solution for people. There's some legislation. I don't want to go into them very much, but there's a federal one that basically allows sanctuary and allows some, let's say, relaxing of building codes and other regulations because of the Religious Land Use Act. And then Washington State allows religious organizations to host temporary encampments. There's also a state law that says that if you provide shelter or transitional housing, your property could be tax exempt. And so we've had private owners who have offered up their property, and they've saved up to $60,000 a year in property tax from doing. So there's a benefit for housing homeless people. And then the city ordinance. An ordinance was unanimously passed by the city council, proposed by the mayor, that allowed for 3 legal encampments on public and private land. And then city council members and the mayor declared a state of emergency. And then 6 tiny house villages were created in before 2017, and then 3 more were created this year. So the new mayor, Mayor Durkin, came up with a 500 bridge housing plan, of which that included 3 new villages. So this is basically how tiny house villages work. Some are managed by staff. Some are managed by, in terms of day-to-day, with our partnership organizations like the grassroots groups, and they exercise democratic decision-making, self-management. There are weekly meetings that are mandatory. People have to contribute work hours. There's a strict code of conduct. Many of them, there's a few that are low barrier, but many of them have some type of requirement for, alcohol, drug use, and, no alcohol or drug use in public places. Nonviolence, sex offenders are screened out, and then no weapons. We've evolved the tiny houses, which used to be tents, into tiny houses, 8 by 12, that are heated and have access to plumbed toilets and showers and kitchens that are fully equipped. So the other thing that's key is the case management. The city has realized that the more they invest in case management, the more people are able to move into housing. So the whole idea is to get people who are on the street into tiny house villages, and then as quickly as possible move them into long-term or permanent housing. So there's a lot of advantages of the villages as opposed to people just staying out, being vulnerable out on the street on their own. And there's a fence that secures the village. There's a gate, and there's facilities so that there's a lot of community, a sense of safety. Couples, families can stay together. And then there's a transition for people to be able to meet with the case manager and then get employment and housing and services. So these are some of the services. This is one family. They are living in a tiny house, and she had the baby was preterm, and she had a difficult pregnancy, but they were able to stay together in one of the villages. So the services include employment, housing, if there's children, daycare, enrollment into like some of the elementary schools, public schools, and transportation. And we also focus on reunification with family and friends. And then we have some outcomes. We've moved over the previous year, we moved over 300 people into long-term housing, 250 people obtained employment, and we reunited 80 people with family or friends. So last year, over 1,000 individuals were served by the tiny house villages. We try to move the families with children out as quickly as possible. And then we also house seniors, veterans, people living with disabilities. We actually have, we've helped a lot of vets. And because we control 2,200 of our own units, we're able to move them into our housing. So we prioritize people moving out of a tiny house into LIHI housing. And then again, we are trying to move families with children as quickly as possible. I want to talk a little bit about outcomes. The shelter system in Seattle, the second quarter report showed that only 4% of people who exit emergency shelters are moving into long-term housing. And so the city's been emphasizing enhanced shelters, which are the 24/7 shelters. And even the 24/7 shelters, the rate of successful exit into housing is 21%. So in comparison, this year, from January through October of this year, we were able to move 32% of the people from tiny houses got into permanent housing, and 9% got into transitional housing. So 41% of the people who left a village, we got into permanent or transitional housing. And 159 people this year got employment or income support. So we are showing through the evaluation process, looking at HMIS, that people who are stabilizing in tiny houses and moving on have a much higher success rate in terms of housing, employment, and sort of being successful. So tiny house construction, this is an area where we were surprised to find so much support among businesses, educational institutions, and other programs. We have like the Girl Scouts, the Cub Scouts, Eagle Scouts, elementary schools, middle schools building tiny houses for us. So I'm going to quickly take you through this. The tiny houses are 8 by 12, and they're insulated and heated. So it's like living in your bedroom, right? It's sort of like the old days of family camp where your family stayed in a lean-to, but then there was a common kitchen and, common restroom, community space. So the cost of a tiny house is $2,500, and $200 is added for transportation. So we have a do-it-yourself kit, and you can see some of them are quite elaborate, very nice, individually decorated and painted. And we have this available on our website, how to put together a tiny house, and then we'll pick it up. So these are our partners: free apprenticeship programs, churches and temples, vocational schools, high schools, corporations, construction companies, and individuals. Youth Build is a major builder of tiny houses. We have Tulalip tribes, the Native American tribes. They've built 16 tiny houses for us. Pre-apprenticeship programs, people who are getting certified are building tiny houses. On lower left, that's the tribes, and they do wonderful, fantastic artwork. on the doors. Youth Build, Seattle Vocational Institute, and the bottom is the apprenticeship and non-traditional employment for women. So these tiny houses are all built by women entering the construction trade. We've got church groups, Mercer Island Presbyterian, they built one on site, and they've built a few others on, like in, let's say in the church parking lot, and then we pick it up. Some of them are sort of fancy. If you look at the lower left, that has nice metal siding, metal roof. This is a construction company that builds multifamily apartments for us, and they take the mock-ups. They take some unused materials from building our buildings, and then they donate a tiny house to us. Renton Technical College, at the upper right, a child development school, high schools. Sawhorse Revolution probably has done the most innovative designs. They have architects, like award-winning architects, who design the tiny houses, and then they build them with high school students. And here's an example of Microsoft volunteers during the United Way Day of Caring. We put a Facebook post, or we arrange with businesses, and we'll get like 100 volunteers come on the weekends building the tiny houses. Here's the Rotarians, International District Rotary. And this is the list of villages. So we have 10 villages. All of them are free to the homeless people. The only one where there's a utility charge is the tiny house village in the central area with the church. That one does not receive City of Seattle support. So the $90 per person per month goes for funding the basic utilities, and the rest of them have operating and service funding from the city. And then we also starting a new village with the City of Olympia at the bottom. So here are some examples of, on the upper left, how we can just get a flatbed truck. The tiny houses are on 4x4 skids. We call out the neighbors, friends, and they're putting together the kitchen tent, the community tent. Here's a site plan. Here's another one. This is the church-sponsored one. You can see this is the first one where we laid electricity to all the tiny houses. You can see the cable being laid. And then you can see on the bottom right is the residential-looking fence. This one is 14 tiny houses on a single-family lot. And we have a model agreement, which is a partnership agreement with the church. So LIHI pays for all utilities. We pay for insurance. We make sure that the place is well run, and then we have a case manager that moves people into housing. And here's the site plan. On the right-hand side is there's a security hut and a gateway, and then the tiny houses, and there's plumb toilets and showers and kitchen facilities. And this is our smallest village, and it works really well in an urban setting. You can see that the showers and toilets are well maintained. Since we took this picture, there is now a handicap accessible ramp to the showers and toilets. This is Nicholsville, Othello Village, which has over 60 people and includes families with children. And these are volunteers. This is a community celebration with the appropriate slogan. Nicholsville, this is on city-owned property, which is surplus property by a fire station. And this one has families with children as well as singles and couples. And so the fire station is to the left, and the village is to the right with, again, showers, kitchen, community space, a gate. This is one of our MLK Day of service, and Starbucks came and served food, and surprisingly, the chairman, Howard Schultz, shows up. And this is high school students competing. They're doing competition on who can build the most green or energy efficient or beautiful tiny houses. So we had 20 high school vocational programs. They brought the houses to the state capitol for a competition. And then the one with the blue door at the bottom was the winning design. And then after the tiny houses were built, on the upper left, we had Teamsters. The Teamsters Union took the Boeing trucks and brought them to one of our villages. And you can see on the lower right, the high school students did a Sistine Chapel design. And they said, oh, if I'm, lying down in my bed, what would I like to look at in terms of a ceiling? And so they did this incredible artwork. This is the Licton Springs Village. Again, you can see community facilities and tiny houses. This is when we opened the shower trailer. This woman spoke. She said that as a homeless person, she would only be able to take a shower maybe once every 3 weeks. And so she's so happy to finally be able to take a shower every day. This is another village. These are, this is a village on Port of Seattle property. The port had unused land, and it leases the land for $10 a year to the city of Seattle, and then we operate the village in partnership with the residents. And you can see some of the nifty designs. But port property, that's another, county property, port property. There's a lot of surplus property. This is on a utility site. Seattle City Light owns this. And you can see that on the lower right, we have plumb toilets and showers, and then tiny houses. These are volunteers. Just by putting up a Facebook post, we have people turn out. This is a village for women only, and it's for homeless women that have been swept by the police, or they don't like it when I say swept by the police, but these are women on the street living in dangerous locations. And we have same-sex couples, and as well as pregnant women. And we have women building for women. So we had women carpenters, electricians, roofers turned out to make this a special project. And this one has tiny houses around it's on city-owned property, around a city light building. This is our probably most ambitious project to date. We had 400 volunteers show up, and we rented out the CenturyLink, where they have the boat shows and the car shows. And people built 30 tiny houses in one day. And we partnered with Vulcan, which is the Paul Allen Company, and the AGC of Washington. So we had contractors, students, and volunteers turn out 30 tiny houses in one day. And then we put them on a flatbed truck and moved them to a village. And here's the new village. And the village that's me on the left. And the village is sponsored by Reverend Jeffrey, who's next to me, Reverend Willis, and then a church volunteer. So this is on church-controlled property. True Hope Village. If you get a chance, you should come and visit. This one, every time we do a village, it's gotten better in terms of community space. Look at on the upper right, that's the way the bathrooms look. And on the lower right we have freezers, kitchen, and then you can see on the inside of a tiny house, it's really nice with bedding, shelving. There's a smoke detector. There's a carbon monoxide detector. There's fire extinguishers. And we have all this wonderful artwork that we invite the artists to come and paint. And then we just opened up Lake Union Village. Again, we have highly decorated tiny houses. And this is City of Seattle property right in the heart of South Lake Union or near downtown. And here we have volunteers. We have Facebook volunteers, all the families with kids come. So we're housing over between 1,000 to 2,000 people every year. And so we need more permanent affordable housing, and we also need more villages as a much better option than staying in a tent. So we ask people to join a work party, build a tiny house, donate a meal, organize donation drives, help fund a tiny house. Great. So I'm happy to start answering some questions.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was really interesting. We do have one question already from Kay at Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, which is the Pittsburgh area. She says, we have municipalities who are interested in zoning for tiny houses, but aren't sure how to deal with building code issues. What are your experiences with the UCC?
Okay, that is a great question. Thank you for asking that. And this is what happened. The city had legalized tent encampments, and we said that tents are not desirable. The neighbors don't like them. What can we do to build a tiny house? So I went directly to the head of the building department, and she said, okay, Sharon, the International Building Code says that a structure is 120 square feet or larger. So you can build your tiny houses under 120 square feet, and we will not count that as a structure. So when we submit a building application or a temporary use application, the tiny houses are considered wood tents. So as long as they're under 120 square feet, they're labeled as wood tents. And of course, tents are not considered, they're temporary. And so we are allowed to then build the tiny houses, as many tiny houses as we want, given a certain square footage. I think, the city has some, certain distance between the tiny houses. But if you want, we can get you in touch with the Seattle Building Department. Since so far, we have 10 tiny house villages, and they're legal, but they have to be characterized as wood tents. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you. And another question just came in from Minnesota. So this is from Spencer. What are the capital costs for the bathroom and kitchen facilities, and who constructs those?
Okay, so we have a variety of ways of doing it. The city brought in a really large hygiene facility, which cost, it's almost like for disaster relief type of trailer, right? It costs over $200,000. That's only on one site. The other one, like you saw, the 3 toilet shower module, that costs about $65,000. So what we do is we have it manufactured, we have the city inspect it, and then we tie it into water and sewer on site. And that seems to be very economical. We have another version where we have a builder who builds tiny houses, and they build a tiny house, and then we're going to put in the showers and toilets into the tiny houses, and we also have laundry. So we're trying to figure out how to make it more economical. So let's say the tiny house costs us about like $3,000 to build, with insulation and everything, and then we add and then we'll have the plumber. We'll have a licensed plumber add the plumbing and laundry equipment.
Got it. Thank you. And I know that you have so many partners in this, from the financing of it to the construction of it, and even just moving them into their spots in the village. And since so many of the listeners on this call are working in local government and may want to replicate this in their communities, what kind of advice would you give local governments that are looking to partner with organizations like yours to make this happen where they are in their communities?
Well, one thing that the city did, the mayor's staff did an inventory of all the city-owned property. And we actually, in King County, the assessor's office has done an inventory of all county-owned and public properties. So there is a list of that identifies everything by zoning and size. And then what we do is we have a meeting with the city and we go through which sites appear to be the most appropriate. And one thing that's obviously very important is the community notification. So we actually have a very defined way of how to notify the community, how to make sure that we answer questions, and more importantly, there's a community advisory committee tied to each village. So the city ordinance says that each village has to have a community advisory committee comprised of 7 people, which are stakeholders. So it includes business people, let's say a neighborhood church, the Chamber of Commerce, residents. And so they meet monthly, and each month they talk about, how things are going, how many people moved into housing, what are, were there incidents, what are problems, and the minutes are posted on the City of Seattle Human Service Department website. So you can go on the website and you can see how each village, how the meetings are going in each village. So there's actually Human Service Department staff that are assigned to the tiny house program, so to speak, and there's a contract monitor. There's a person that does work on work with us on the program and evaluations. And we are happy to give you like the key people to contact in the City of Seattle, either the Human Service Department or the building department. And of course, we also have very strong support from the mayor, because this is what's happened. The mayor is spending hundreds and millions of dollars cleaning up from the trash and human waste from illegal encampments. And what happens when the police and the navigation team, when they approach people who are camping out and say, you can't camp out here, right? We're going to refer you to a shelter or a tiny house village, but you can't stay here. More often than not, people will say, okay, I'm happy to move to a tiny house village. So the tiny houses have shown to be so much more successful because people who are living in a tent now, they don't want to move to a shelter where, they have no privacy. They're in a space with everybody else. They're worried about their belongings. They're worried about bed bugs. They're worried about catching diseases. So the tiny house allows someone to have their own private space, lock the door, feel safe, and they are so happy to have a heated, insulated tiny house with electricity.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, and here we have on the last page, if you have any additional questions, you can send them to tinyhouses@lihi.org, lihi.org. Rachel and Sharon, both thank you for your time today and for sharing this presentation and this great information. We will have this up and available, the recording, on our website and on our YouTube page, and encourage attendees to share this with your staff as well. Rachel and Sharon, any last thoughts?
Oh, I'm sorry. There's a question here on how long does it take to build one tiny house? Well, we have, as you saw, we had people build 30 tiny houses in one day, but you can do it over on a weekend. Usually, if you had 4 people, you could quickly complete a tiny house in like a weekend.
Oh, wow. And for less than $3,000.
That's right.
Yeah, my last thoughts were just going to be a big thank you to Sharon and LIHI for presenting. That was extremely inspirational, honestly, just seeing those pictures and seeing not only all the work that you guys do, but how much you're really able to involve all of these various individuals and organizations across the Seattle area is incredibly inspiring. So thank you so much for sharing.
Yes, and thank you also.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, ViewPoint Cloud, for making this happen as well, for making the connection. So thank you once again, and we will catch you on our next webinar. Everyone have a great day.
Take care.
Thank you.